Welcome to Now Serving a Site of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Be sure to follow, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To schedule a therapy appointment, call us at 650-223-5065. For more information on this and other related topics, check out our blog at isotherapy.com, where you can also contact us through our website. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. All right, so welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Site of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Today, we are joined by Dena, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist with offices in the San Francisco East Bay area. She's the owner of Good Roots Psychotherapy, a collective of like-minded clinicians who work to support folks in their communities and their overall mental health needs. Dena works with individuals of all ages and specializes in dialectical behavioral therapy, which can also be known as DBT. So super excited about talking about DBT today, Dena, because we haven't discussed this topic yet in our podcast episodes thus far. So thanks for joining us and talking about it today.
Hi, Dalton. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I'm really excited about talking about therapy and especially DBT.
Awesome. And so you've started your own practice called Good Roots Psychotherapy. And so can you just briefly talk a little bit about that, like how that got started? And
I sure can. So like a lot of clinicians, I was trying to figure out how to do the post-licensure life of juggling kind of being a clinician. Where do I find myself? Do I go private practice? Do I go community mental health or another sector? And then I decided that I would do private practice. And then the pandemic hit, and then I needed a quiet place to go. And so because I had a couple of small children at home, and home wasn't all the things we needed for a therapy space. And so I needed to find a therapy space, and I created Good Roots Psychotherapy, which is a soft, tranquil space that's not my home. And I have clinicians who also work here, and we all serve different modalities. Mine happens to be DBT, and so that's what we're here to talk about. But there are other clinicians who work here and do all sorts of different kinds of work. So that's what we do. And Good Roots comes from my upbringing. I'm Greek by tradition and heritage. And so growing up, my parents would say, you come from good roots, no matter where you go. And then when I went into the holistic world and knowing humanistic frame and saying like, we're all good, really speaks to that. So that's why Good Roots Psychotherapy exists. And that's what continues to bring me here. That's a little bit about my background.
I like that you use the bit of family background to inform, like it's in the name, right? It's literally in the name. And so I often think about, I don't know if you watch like cooking shows, but I'll watch like Top Chef or whatever. And like some of the challenges is, they'll often say, oh, well, I have this memory of my childhood from, my grandmother teaching me how to cook. And so that's in this dish today, right? So I think of it kind of like that, right? Where we still kind of use our earlier life experiences and bring those into our practice today, because not everything boils down to childhood, but oftentimes, you work with clients long enough, like it's bound to come up at some point, right? And so to your point, it's like, okay, well, what are some of the good parts too, right? Not everything is quote unquote bad, right? There are also some good parts, and we still get to honor those in our work today. So I love that. Even just the name of it is, right, just honoring that.
Thank you. Absolutely. My hope and my envision was always to have it to be infused by both my culture and how I was, my values, and also by the way that my training has shaped me, right? DBT's tenets are building a life worth living, having a good enough life, right? So doing things and continuing to persevere. And so when the pandemic hit, it wasn't like, okay, deer in the headlights. It was like, okay, now what do I do with this and pivot, right? And so how often in our lives are we stuck with that pivot moment? And that just happened to be mine. And so through and through, I try to live the life that I continue to work with my clinicians and my clients with. And also I try to do that myself, right? Try to take care of all of it. So yeah.
Yeah, that aspect of a life worth living, right? It's like a lot of us can kind of like, dream of that or hope for it, but this aspect of getting into action too has something to do with it too, right? We can't just kind of like wish it to be, right? Or oh, we'll see what happens, right? It's like no, there's kind of some specific intention and work around getting there. And so it can take effort, right? A lot of the kind of when we think about kind of therapeutic progress, like it's not easy work, right? And so oftentimes we have to go through old ways of thinking or limiting self-referential beliefs, right? In order to be able to move past those to help us get to a life worth living, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of Brene Brown's Daring to Leap, right? There's lots of um, very famous books out there that are, you have to fail forward, lean in, kind of all of those things, got to have a little bit of faith. And that takes some, and I think that's where that good enough comes from, right? That like you have to have faith in yourself and faith in where you're in alignment. And yeah, that's the
And
hope
so
here,
many
right?
things can come into mind, right? It's like whether or not we were taught that as a child from our parents, or if we think there's like perfectionism tendencies, right, that can get in the way, right? So a lot of factors to kind of like sift through and and try to get an understanding for ourselves of what is coming up for us, as which we'll get into the process here in a little bit, right? But what's coming up for us as we engage in this process, and how can we work with that?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
I
so
love
you
working
mentioned
with
a
them.
particular resource, right? And I just wanted to take a moment too to make a plug for the workbook, right? So if anybody's working, wondering, oh, how can I work on some DBT skills, right? So there's this dialectical behavior therapy skills workbook. Um, and it says it's a practical DBT exercises for learning mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, emotion regulation, and distress tolerance, which is a
That's
lot
the
of big
manual.
words.
That's the gold standard, right? You can also get that downloaded. I think there's an electronic free press does a free download of it, and so folks can download it and then parcel through it and have it just the parts that speak to them can be very helpful for folks.
Love that. Love that. Thank you for that. Um, and so let's see. So you kind of indicate with DBT, right? You indicate that it can be considered as a dialogue between two opposing ideas in our head, and ultimately the decision of whether to act or not in DBT on that thought stream. Can you expand a little bit on that part?
Sure. So DBT is, let's just start by giving credit where credit's due. Marsha Linehan, this is her guiding life's work. And um, she's known for really building upon the skills of cognitive behavioral therapy and adding mindfulness and pushing and creating what we call dialectical behavioral therapy. And as you rightfully acknowledged, dialectical behavioral therapy is the conversation that we have in our head all of the time between two opposing thoughts. So it's should or shouldn't I, will I, won't I, can or can't I, is it or isn't it? And ultimately that kind of grappling conflict that we have, and what do we do with it? That's the behavior of it all. And how closely we get to that decision making, um, and and how we work with that is the basis of DBT.
And so I almost kind of think about when I was getting into, kind of, and when I was an associate, right, and I was like learning different modalities, I was intrigued with like IFS around conflicting parts, right? People will say a part of me this versus a part of me that, right? And so again, lots of different ways that people can go about when they're like you said, kind of facing this aspect of indecision. And so, but just to show like, so how would you say like IFS might be different from DBT in this regard?
IFS is a wonderful exploration of many parts. And Linehan takes a slightly more global perspective, and she breaks down the cognition into mainly three parts. And so if you think about, there is the emotional piece. And so that might be your emotional reasoning, the way that you might react, any sort of emotional minded thinking. And then there is the logic thinking. So any kind of strict agendas that are void of any emotionality. And so we vacillate between these two modalities, largely dependent upon how we're raised, how we're just hard baked. So our temperament or personality, and then our environment, right? So then that kind of makes us who we are. And some of us are more emotional brained, some of us are more logic brained. And if I'm sure you can think about people in your life who are one or the other, or times that you
Yeah, I'm
yourself
definitely more emotional, right? You do like the personality test, right? The Myers-Briggs test. Yeah, I'm definitely more emotional.
I mean, one might say that leans you to this profession. Um, right.
Right? Yeah.
Likewise. And then there are those folks who are more logic brained. Think of the mathematicians, the folks who just like to figure things out, who are the engineer folks. So those people, that's just the way that their brain works. And then through the course of life and environments, those personalities, those traits, those things have been bloomed, if you will,
And they've been
in one.
expressed. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And so often our job is to help folks support, well, is that an emotional mind thinking, or are we just over rationalizing this, and supporting them ideas to figure out where this is coming from, to either reduce the intensity of it or increase the intensity of it, or but mostly our goal is to bring about harmony and balance. And when we bring about harmony and balance in DBT, we call that wise. So when we're equal parts rational and logical, that is a wise space. And that's what Linehan argues is balance. And that's what our
I
striving.
see. For that striving for that wise mind. Yeah. And when we think about, I mean, the thing I like about the podcast is that, okay, yeah, anyone can like Google like wise mind, right? But it's like our intent and hope here is that we can offer a little bit more texture and insights from our own personal experiences, either for ourselves or working with clients, right? Or just so that we can kind of expand and give a little bit more kind of tangibleness to this idea, to these ideas that we're discussing. And so to that point, what I was thinking when you were talking about the wise mind, like you said, it's like the emotion part that can come up, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe there's fears around this particular situation that I'm, facing, right? You say pros and cons, and right, should I, shouldn't I, right? Okay, well, maybe there's some fears. I know that when I was leaving the corporate world years ago and I was going to venture out into becoming self-employed, it took me months to like make that decision, like, am I going to do this or not? And people were just like, can you just make a decision already instead of talking about it? But for me, like, that's just the process that I needed, right? And so again, like there can be fears that come up that might kind of contribute to that emotional mind piece, right? And also when we think about the reasonable mind, right, that maybe, like you said, if we're going to go overboard with that, that could be like a defense mechanism too, right? So I can feel safe and secure while I'm like facing this unknown decision, before I like venture out. And so does that kind of speak to a little bit of like what might come up when we're working with the wise mind part?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a wise mind comes into play in almost every interaction. We either use it or don't use it, right? But it comes into purview every single time that we have what we call a stressor. And a stressor can be something that we're thinking about, for you, a job change. It could be something that is something as simple as a gust of wind, a smell, a sound. Something is going to shift your thinking or your presence of mind into a different space. My favorite example of this is the French fry paradigm.
The
Would you like
French fry paradigm.
would you like to hear it? It's
I would love to hear it.
All right. Do you have a favorite French fry?
You know, I actually like the I forget the name of the cut, but there's like a particular cut to them and they're like super crunchy on the outside but soft on the inside.
Okay. Extra crispy cut French fries. Do you have,
Yes.
okay. Do you have a particular place from?
Actually, a place down the street actually has them. I was like, "Ooh, these are the fries that." But you know what? Now that you're thinking about this, oh my God, they're the kind of fries that I liked when I was a kid. Actually, now that I think about it, like I remember literally having those fries. I'm like, "Oh my God, these fries remind me when I was a kid."
Aha. And look at that. It has an emotional response. And how do they make you feel?
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely had a couple, right? I have to try not to go overboard on it, but
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is good." Like this is very satisfying.
Okay. Generally, people look at French fries and they have that similar, like, oh, yeah, that's good. That's a French fry, right? So it's a generally a desirable response. Um, and then you look at the French fry and you might analyze the French fry a little bit more and you go, ooh, but those are crispy cut fries from the place I really like down the street. So you're already making an emotional and logical pros and cons list on whether or not you're going to eat the French fry. So the question is do you eat the French fry or do you not eat the French fry? Well, what do you eat the
Um,
French fry?
yeah, yeah, I had some. Yeah, yep.
Okay. So many people will ask many, many, many questions like, are they my French fries? Did I put them in the room? Right. So there are lots of questions inherently that we could be thinking about. Am I hungry? Did I have breakfast? Is it the only thing I've had today? So these are all determining factors that might support whether or not you eat or don't eat the French fry. Um, and so, very similarly in DBT, we think about you can replace French fry with anything, and you think about the logical and the emotional reasons on whether or not we eat the French fry.
Sure. Yeah, I did happen to think about what have I had to eat that day, right? And things like that. Yeah. And oh, what was the rating on the restaurant, right? I was like, what's this rating on the restaurant before I buy these, right?
Yeah,
Stuff like
absolutely.
that.
Can I
Yeah.
can I trust it? Am I hungry enough? Right? These are all emotion. These are logical reasonings that help sway your decision making in the moment, right? And we make these decision making moments split second, right? We either decide to eat the French fry or not eat the French fry, like that. And so
Like that. Yeah, it's quick.
and so our job is to slow it down and say, what is the French fry? And what are all of the varying things in the emotional and logical spaces that go into the decision making on whether or not we eat or don't eat the French fry? And all of that together is what goes on to complex thinking, right? Over a stimuli.
With, something that's coming to mind to me as we're thinking about this is, or as we're talking about this, you know how there's the aspect of like freeze or fight or flight, freeze or fawn, right?
Mhm.
Do you think that like when we're like, if there's like this emotional and logical states that we're like trying to battle with to come to that wise mind, have you experienced that like sometimes people can kind of like get overwhelmed and kind of engage in one of these fight or flight or freeze or fawn stages? Is that applicable here?
Absolutely. Yeah, Dalton, that's prime examples to why I think a lot of people come to therapy is they're stuck in a particular mode, right? It's I respond to this stressor by avoidance, by distraction, by numbing, by whatever the case may be, and that's just not working anymore. It's not working because I'm losing relationships or I'm losing um, status in some space. And usually that's why people come to therapy, right? Like someone goes, something's slipping, you gotta go talk to somebody, right? And so often we have to work towards figuring out what that balance is and going toward it. So we go towards solutions. So where this is a solution oriented um, theory or and like skill set that is also focused on acting opposite. And so sometimes we have to do what we call a little like trickery. Um, and what do I mean by that? It means that, so let's go back to the French fry.
Okay.
When you when you thought about the French fry, you had a smile on your face, you had a reaction, and I commented. Remember that?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that response is called an automatic response. Right. And we have automatic responses all of the time, right? Positive and negative that kind of inform our bodies. Um, and so we have to use, we have to check that a little bit. Does that make sense?
Would you say that are you talking about like this intercuriosity, right? So like you said, if people kind of like get stuck in this kind of automatic response pattern, right? And they're feeling stuck, a way to, like you say, kind of work through that getting unstuck is kind of engaging with curiosity.
That's right. That's right. Asking yourself, what is going on with me? Or what is happening to my body? And so sometimes this is easily explained or explored in like when people have panic attacks. So a panic attack is a visceral or a body sensation, and our body is warning us, right? And so we have to ask ourselves by a series of questions, right? And we might say, are we in danger? And, doing some sort of assessment around like, okay, I am in a safe room. I am here. So doing some kind of, that's just basic mindfulness around time and place. And sometimes that can help. And sometimes we have to go a little further when our body doesn't quite react in the same way and we continue to have panics. And so Linehan teaches a series of skills that are really connected to that. And so we can talk a little bit about that, but let's just talk a little bit first about just decreasing and talking about intensity. That feels step. Does that seem
So
helpful?
what is that part about intensity and feeling stuck?
Well, the idea of like, how are you when you're asking those curiosity questions, and maybe do you need to put more intensity towards something or reducing the intensity of something? And how do you increase that space towards wise mind? Either reducing stuckness or reducing kind of that kind of hyper emotional.
Overthinking tendencies or uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think the first step is not, I think the first step is really providing yourself with an idea of a scale, right? Like, where am I on this scale? How do I bring it down? And then what's going on and noticing, right? All of those noticing cues.
Yeah, that's a great idea because it's kind of like if, for example, whether we're in hyper or hypo arousal, right, we would do different things to get to where we want to be, right? And so similarly here, right, I like that idea of scaling. Okay, am I overly emotional or where am I on the emotional scale versus the logical mind scale, right? And to try to get those to balance out towards that wise mind. Yeah, I like that idea. I've never thought about that. Like, can I gauge if I'm being, overly reactive or underly reactive in some way when I'm kind of facing these decisions?
Yeah. And does it match the environment? Does my environment match this level of emotionality? It may not, right? If you're all worked up, but you're at work, that's not that's a mismatch of your emotionality in that space, right? And so, or similarly, if you're under emotional, but you need to be reactive, that could lead to some dangerous situations. And so finding ways to find balance or find harmony in all of that is helpful. And which really starts with a connection to your body, right? So like knowing what's going on in your body and knowing what's going on in your mind and connecting the
Yeah,
two.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Often indicate that those, being more mindful of the body, the somatic symptoms can tell us what might be happening and clue us in before our mind before our conscious mind, right? Before we're like really aware of it. Sometimes cluing in somatically can give hints into what's going on. Uh,
Mhm.
uh. Yeah, so that was a big discussion on wise mind, right? Um, how would you say, okay, so we talked about maybe assessing on a scale, right? That's emotional versus logical mind scales. And that might give us a way to into how we might be able to access wise mind, right? What are some other ways that you would suggest, like how can we access wise mind?
Well, You can access wise mind. First, having a relationship to it and talking to it is first. So like identifying when you're in wise mind and befriending wise mind and saying, okay, we're in wise. This is what this looks like. This is what this feels like. And I tell people, color it all in. What does it really look like? Give it a shape, give it a color, give it a feeling, really fill it in. And so that you know when you're in there, and then when you know when you're not. And then when you know when you're not, often your body will tell you first. And so we have to look and pay attention to our body. And so there's some research around this, and it's called the dive response. The dive response is a response that is initiated when you go a certain amount of depth underneath the ocean. And when you do that, your body goes into its equilibrium shifts. And
Right.
so when you're in fight or flight or freeze, what we might do is elicit that same sort of response. And so we can trick our body into kind of a reboot or a reset. And that can be a real big helpful way of being like, whoa, I'm okay. I am safe. I am here. I'm back in my wise space. And so we do, there's a couple of specific techniques that I can share and a little tip. So we could talk about those, but that can be.
Yeah. Can you share one?
Yeah. So Dr. Linehan is famous for what she calls the tip skills. And so it's tip the temperature, increase pace, and progressive muscle relaxation, and pace muscle breathing. So these are all really great. And in my use of them, it's hard to jump in a shower in the middle of the day in the middle of a panic attack. And so as doing this work for as long as we've been doing it, we've had to find ways to modify. And so some really great tools to modify are snap hot and cold packs. So if you can get them from, the drugstore, and your HSA covers them, like your health savings account, so people can use those too. But they're little ice packs that snap, and you can put them on your face. And what that does is that it cools your face down, and it sends a signal to your body that you're being cared for, that you're not in danger. It provides positive self-touch, and it reduces the blood flow and pushes it back into the heart and into the working organs, opposed into the flight or fight organs. And so that's a really big tip that we like to use. And so sometimes I'll just, give out away ice packs. And so I encourage folks to, like, if you know we're going to have a panic attack, if you know you're going to have a stressful situation, put one in your pocket, put one in your glove box, in your desk drawer at work. That's a really good one. The other one is a sweet and sour mixed candy. So have you ever heard this trick? A Sour Patch Kid?
Oh, I mean, I've heard of Sour Patch Kids. Yeah, I haven't had one in years, but I haven't heard of the trick though.
The Sour Patch Kid is a fantastic tip skill tool that you could use and you could adapt anytime. So anytime you feel like your heart is racing, you're nervous, you feel like, you just feel it in your gut. What's happening is your body is responding to a stressor, a perceived stressor. And so if you know that you're not in immediate danger, we can put a Sour Patch Kid, and it's that sweet and sour. What it does, it activates the salivary glands, and it again switches your autonomic responses and immediately reduces. It also starts your curiosity around kind of that complex flavor, and it shifts it away from that panic thought. And so they've done lots of studies on it. It's specifically that sweet and sour combination that works. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting, huh? Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna, yeah, because we work with clients who will often say like, oh, I had a who exhibit panic attacks. So I'm definitely going to remember these and look into these ideas, and yeah, and suggest those. And yeah, I definitely have some cool packs in the freezer, that, the little things we can snap off. And
Yep.
so, I mean, whenever I'm like relax, at night watching TV, I'm often like mobilizing or using the foam roller or something like that. Again, just that kind of aspect of self-care. And and so I think, yeah, that's just another great way to do that, right? It's like you can just do it like while you're, well, you may not be able to watch TV, see the TV. You can still hear it, right? But again, the idea is that these little tips and tricks are things that are like easy to do, right? And you can almost like do them anywhere, right? And they don't require a particular time and space. Um, and so that the fact that it's easy to do, we're more likely to do it.
That's exactly it. My goal is for you to get through your day with as less friction as possible. And aside from any sort of like eating kind of rule out, I largely will say to somebody, have a little toolbox that's going to help you get through your day. Um, Life is hard. Take a piece of candy while on your way out. It helps sweeten the day a little bit. And it's similar in that way with, got to do hard things. It might as well be a little easier.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I like this
Yeah.
idea of when you talked about befriending the wise mind and like getting to know it and talking to it. Right. Um, Oftentimes people, you've heard the saying, right? Oh, well, do you talk to yourself? And I'll say, yeah. And I answer myself too. Right. It's like these kind of conversations that we have with ourselves back and forth. Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to tune in next week as we continue our discussion with Dena around DBT and explore areas of acting opposite, practicing mindfulness with DBT, the and yet skill, and using SMART goals for baby steps.